Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the MD&M West Conference 2013. My name is Louise Chalice. I'm the Conference Director for UBM Canon. Whether you're here just for today or you're joining us for several sessions this week, I really wish you a successful learning and networking experience. You're going to see me around and my other colleagues from the conference team, and I'd really welcome any feedback from you so that we continue to really improve and develop this conference to make it your annual learning resource. I'm especially excited to be standing here on this stage for our first keynote presentation to take place ever at MD&M West. Before I just hand over to Heather, our editor-in-chief for MDDI, I'd just like everyone to turn off their mobile phones and put them on silent. And without further ado, I hand over to Heather, who will get us officially started. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Heather Thompson. I'm the editor-in-chief of MDDI, and I have the distinct pleasure to introduce Stanton Rowe today. Stanton is he's in a unique position to talk about innovation in the medical device world. Before serving as Edwards Lifesciences Corporate Vice President, Advanced Technology, and Chief Science Officer, Stan was the CEO of Percutaneous Valve Technology, and that's the company that pioneered percutaneous heart valves. When Edwards acquired PVT, Stan came on board and helped Edwards become one of the first companies to enter the transcatheter heart valve therapy market. So as the medtech industry moves forward in 2013, we're facing pressures that seem designed to stymie innovation and reward iteration. But those who watch industry know that falling into the iteration trap doesn't serve patients, nor is it a sustainable business model. So we need leaders of the industry to push the boundaries of medtech innovation and support firms that are creating devices for the next century. With that in mind, I'm pleased to introduce Stanton Rowe, Corporate Vice President of Advanced Technology and Chief Science Officer for Edwards Lifesciences.
Good morning. Thanks for coming out. Hope the traffic didn't dampen your spirits here. This is a fun topic for me. I've been involved in innovation for quite a number of years, pioneering the early coronary stents, early drug-eluting stents, transcatheter valves, and now at Edwards we have the unique position of really innovating in a large company, which is something that's not common. So it's my privilege here to talk with you today about innovation. Is there room for this today? And boy, it's really a fair question, I think, because never before have we faced the same kind of challenges that we face today, and we'll talk about some of those. One thing we can all be proud of, we share something very important. We all share in our struggle to create new products to fight disease and to fight trauma, and our partnership with physicians and hospitals and companies to make these new products is something we can all very much be proud of. I know I'm personally proud of this. Going home every day knowing that our focus is to serve patients is one of the most meaningful things in my life. But everyone wants to help. And we get a lot of it. We get help from the FDA. They want to help us ensure that we have very safe and very effective products. We get help from hospitals, right? They want to make sure that we're providing both high-quality products. We train physicians well. We provide cost-effective products for their use. We serve patients, most importantly. They're at the end of this line. If we're not really helping them in meaningful, measurable ways, we're not doing our job. And of course, we have CMS. CMS is a very important customer of ours. They want to know that their reimbursement is supporting great outcomes and cost-efficient outcomes. And of course, in Washington, we have the privilege of paying slightly higher taxes this year. But with that, of course, there's supposed to be more patients coming in for therapy. So we get a lot of help in this industry, and sometimes it doesn't feel that great, but those standards are very important to us in making the highest quality, most effective products. So here's what our industry looks like at a glance. A little hard to read. Let me go through it. Revenues from 2010 to 2011 up 4%. The conglomerates, the big companies, up 7%. Interesting. So the conglomerates were actually slightly higher. Pure play companies only up 2% in revenues. R&D expense up 2%, but notice in 2011, 9.9 of 204, that's about 4.5%, 5% investment in R&D dollars at a mean. SG&A expense, it's more and more expensive to market and sell our products. Net income was healthy, up 19%, so we're not exactly struggling as an industry financially. Our cash is healthy. Market caps didn't do that well, down 7%. So how the public values our companies is not as great, and maybe that says something about how they perceive our growth over the next several years. Number of employees up 2%, and the number of public companies decreased, which means there continues to be some consolidation in the industry. If you look at U.S. commercial leaders, these are pure play companies with revenues in excess of $1 billion. It looks a little bit better, 3% growth in revenues. But notice the R&D expense goes up. There's a greater investment, about 7% in R&D in these pure play companies, meaning that it takes a lot of investment in R&D for these companies to really be successful and grow. Number of employees are growing here, and revenues are pretty much flat. So, wow, not exactly despite all of the pessimism, not exactly a bad scenario for our industry. Well, you know, the early days of medtech innovation are something to look back on. This is Dr. Albert Starr in the upper left corner, and Dr. Lowell Edwards. Dr. Starr was a newly minted cardiothoracic surgeon from Maryland. And Lowell Edwards was an aeronautical engineer. There was no such thing as a biomedical engineer back then. And these guys collaborated to make the very first commercially available heart valves in the world. In fact, Mr. Edwards decided that what he really wanted to do was to make a total artificial heart. And Dr. Starr said, well, you know, if we're going to do that, we're going to need to have valves in that. So let's start there. And of course, they spent the rest of their careers collaborating just to make the heart valves. But it was a huge, huge deal because nobody had heart valve replacement products. Patients died. So these amazing products saved many, many patients' lives, and there are still patients walking around with Starr Edwards valves. From design to first in man, 2 years. Wow, 2 years. A little different these days. It's taken us 50 years to get from that point to transcatheter heart valves. A very long road. Wow. Why so long? Why does it take so long? Well, again, we've got a lot of challenges around us. The amount of paperwork, the physicians and payers that are under stress, time and cost of innovation just seems extraordinary today. The FDA requirements keep going up. The worldwide requirements are going up. Working with notified bodies has gotten more difficult. This is a really tough time for innovation. But with that being said, I'm not pessimistic in the least. I do want to show you what a PMA looks like. That's about a 30-foot long table. Pretty amazing. A lot of paperwork. Oh, I forgot to tell you, that was half of it. This is the clinical piece. So this is the manufacturing piece. So those of you in manufacturing, you think there's a little bit to validations and verifications. Wow, yeah. This was the clinical piece to go into it. A lot to read, a lot to validate. Well, my wife just bought a new Prius. Why does that matter? Well, I thought a lot about this car. It reminds me of something. It reminds me of the fact, this is a high-quality product, very reasonable cost, very serviceable, practical. It's got all kinds of features. You can do heads-up display. It's got a heads-up display in it. It's got lane warnings. It's got all kinds of cool stuff, and there's a lot of variety within the category. I wish I drove this. I don't. I'd like to show the other side. But you look at a Lamborghini. It's a high quality, high cost, exclusive, flashy, limited portfolio, an amazing car to drive. But I think about this and think, hospitals want this guy. Today they want practical, reliable, serviceable products. Our definition for products has changed. We look and we say, gee, the amount of evidence required, the cost effectiveness requirements, the requirements to have an impact really matter. And what we need to develop are those very reliable, very serviceable products that hospitals, customers, our patients, our physicians need. Lamborghinis are out. So, I think about this status quo. So when we started with the Discman and we went to iterating something, changing the norm is what really matters. What we have to do is look at this complex medical environment and see needs that are really unmet. And they have to be unmet to the extent that we can have a measurable impact, a visible, measurable impact. We can no longer kind of iterate for iteration's sake. We can't iterate in the middle here because nobody's going to pay for it. So what do we have to do? We have to prove that we are improving outcomes. Guess what? For many of us, that means randomized clinical trials to really innovate. That's a huge expense. You saw how much paperwork goes into it, but it's years of work. It's millions of dollars to do this. But it's worth it if we can demonstrate that. At the same time, we have to conduct cost effectiveness. And by the way, that's pretty tricky because when you do cost effectiveness studies in a first generation product, you're comparing it to something that's maybe been refined for 30 years. Not so easy. Not easy to demonstrate benefit and prove cost effectiveness in a first generation product. So what does that mean? Most of us go internationally first. We spend a few years in Europe refining the product before we even think about bringing it to the US. I hope that scenario changes, and I know the FDA is very interested in trying to bring innovation back to the United States. But it can't be just first in man's. It has to go beyond that. It has to go to having a favorable environment for doing this early stage refinement. And that means we have to be able to learn in clinic, modify the product, and go back into clinic in a reasonable period of time. That's been a huge challenge for many years, and that's why most people do iteration in Europe today. So these dual requirements of healthcare economics and improved patient outcomes are really tough, but this is our world. So I definitely believe that our environment is a Darwinian environment. Charles Darwin, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that's most adaptable to change. We have this changed environment. We have to be prepared to adapt to it. And those that don't, they won't be around in 15 or 20 years. So we have to prioritize. We have to figure out what's really going to have an impact. We make huge investments in R&D. Today at Edwards, we're investing 15% of sales in R&D. It's an amazing commitment. We have to look at our portfolio and say, what's really going to make it? So like everything else, we have to make those tough decisions and say, here are going to be the two winners out of this portfolio of 10 different new devices. Here's what we're going to really invest in. Quality systems, service, they're part of the game. I mean, the launching a product and then either not being able to supply it or having challenges with reliability or repeatability, your assimilation is going to be dramatically impaired, as is your reputation. So generating this evidence beyond safety and effectiveness for cost effectiveness, quality of life, efficacy, really challenging stuff. But I think we're all up to it, and I've seen it. Over the last several years, I've seen some really great PMAs go through the FDA. Many of the innovative devices that are iterating in the 510K area, 510K with clinical trials, have looked really remarkable. People are adapting to this environment successfully. So I would also say that, you know, this opportunity to look into this changed environment also provides opportunities to look at distribution, look at emerging markets and device procedures. And by the way, emerging markets aren't that simple. A lot of people talk about that like, well, gee, we'll just go to China and open up shop and people will come. You know, they spend $150 a year on average for medical care in China. How much of that $150 are you going to get? Not so easy. You're going to take your high-priced product in the United States, okay, and move it to China, you better be adapting to that environment as well. So the global marketplace is a pretty challenging market for us. Well, let me tell you a little bit about this guy. So this is the transcatheter heart valve. When I started playing with this, nobody liked the idea. In fact, the biggest customers in the world, the heart valve experts, the cardiothoracic surgeons, said it was a remarkably bad idea. They said, let me tell you all the reasons this is a bad idea. Number one, we treat all the patients. Two, we have incredible outcomes. We have 3% mortality. Average age of patients is 73 years of age. We probably only don't treat 2%, 3% of patients. Heart valves last 20 years, 25 years. Tissue valves last that long. What do we need this for? And by the way, even if you made one, it wouldn't be durable, okay? You don't use any stitches. You don't stitch this thing in, so it's going to embolize. You're going to cause strokes in all the patients. It won't be durable, and it'll have poor hemodynamics. Other than that, it's a great idea. So we didn't get a lot of encouragement, okay? But that is the world of innovation. I currently believe that when you have physicians look at you and say, why do I need that? You have to look way beyond it, because many times our customers, even the brightest among them, don't know what they want. They don't know what they need. And this was a great example. One of the guys who did the most pioneering work on this is Henning Ruud Anderson. Henning's a friend of mine. We're the same age. He's a lot smarter and better looking, but we can't have it all. Henning is an interventional cardiologist based in Aarhus, Denmark. Probably not many of us here have been to Aarhus. You have to be lost to find Aarhus. But he did some brilliant work. He flew back from a meeting in Scottsdale, Arizona in the late 80s with the idea of making a percutaneously delivered heart valve. From having seen stents, he took the idea of a peripheral vascular stent and said, let's build a heart valve inside. A ridiculous idea, okay? And he spent years developing this. He resected his own porcine tissue from porcine hearts. He hand-made these stents from sternal wires. We actually have the jig that he created himself in our Edwards Museum. Those are cardiology knots, not surgeon's knots, if you can see on that heart valve in the upper right. And he put it on pretty poor balloon catheters here. This thing was not exactly percutaneous. It was 41 French. But it was remarkable work. He treated about 80 animals with this to prove the basic principles. And he wrote the fundamental patents in this area. And I give him huge credit for being an innovator before his time. He sold these patents for a song to Hartport. And we bought them later at PVT. But I have huge respect for Henning. Here he is, and he was just this lonely at his first presentation of transcatheter valves in about 1990. And he said, I was so excited, I got this poster presentation, knew everybody was going to come to show up and see this brand new technology, and he said, nobody came. He tried to publish. He has all kinds of documents of people turning him down, saying how ridiculous it was. And I shared those experiences with him because when we were developing this product, there was not a lot of enthusiasm. Thank you for letting me see this manuscript, Jack, okay? I'm sorry to have to reject it, but my overall rating is that it's too low a priority for publication in Jack. Today, if you go to the American Heart meeting or the ACC or a lot of the major cardiology meetings, you'll spend a day and a half doing nothing but looking at transcatheter valve publications. Here's a guy who was 15 years ahead of his time. And industry wasn't interested, academia wasn't interested. Innovation can be a lonely sport. Another, priority remains too low. Thanks very much from circulation. And of course, things changed when we finally, in April 2002, treated this gentleman. It was quite an event. You know, Dr. Cribier called me up and said, I have a patient, and it was a few months before we'd actually planned our first in man. So tell me about it, Alain. Dr. Cribier said, well, he's 57 years old. He's been a coal miner, so he's had black lung disease. He has a failed aortobifemoral graft. He came in yesterday in cardiogenic shock. How'd you like to do your first in man in a patient in cardiogenic shock? They treated him with a balloon. He got a little bit better, but gosh, his ejection fraction was somewhere between 10 and 15%. I didn't even know you could survive with a 10% ejection fraction. It just meant his heart was enormous. He was ashen, he was cold, he was in and out of consciousness. And this is the case Dr. Cribier wanted to do our first in man on. Innovation is, wow, it's a tough sport. So I sat up all night waiting for the results of this case. Dr. Cribier did a different approach because we'd always done femoral approach for transcatheter valves. This guy had a failed aortobifemoral graft. We couldn't go through the femorals. So we had to do a transeptal puncture, go through the right atrium, go through the left atrium, go through and around the left ventricle to treat the aortic valve. Amazing. This guy died during the procedure. His heart stopped. And while he was under chest compressions, Cribier delivered the valve and implanted it. And his heart started. And that night, he sat up and had a glass of champagne with Cribier and talked with him. That's the impact of this technology. There was no sternal incision. There was no major trauma. He was not on cardiopulmonary support. He had the full benefit of this innovation. And it was the first time anybody had ever done an aortic valve replacement without open heart surgery. So, how did Dr. Anderson, who had this original idea, how did he benefit and think about this innovation? Would you roll this video, please?
Found out that my Dad was a potential candidate for TAVI. I hoped that my colleagues would choose the best treatment for him, and I was not involved in making the decision if you should have the TAVI procedure or standard surgery, but I was happy that my colleagues actually chose TAVI for him because I knew that he would recover much, much faster.
Jeg talte med Henning om det, men ikke ret meget, fordi jeg synes ikke, det var noget at udbrede sig så meget om.
For som lægen sagde den dag, han skulle tage stilling til, om han ville til Skejby, så sagde han, du er jo frisk i hovedet, og du kan få mange gode år, derfor vil jeg indstille dig til at få en ny hjerteklap på Skejby sygehus. Og han sagde ja med det samme.
The benefit of TAVI for elderly patients with aortic stenosis is that they recover much, much faster. Everything went really perfect. My colleagues were very good. I was sitting outside the room, looking through the window, looking at my colleagues doing the procedure, and everything went very beautiful. When my colleagues came out from the room, we did high five because everything was smooth. So it was a nice feeling to see my dad wake up again inside the room.
Jo, på hans vegne er jeg jo meget stolt af ham. Jeg kan ikke rigtig lide at bruge ord stolt, men jeg er stolt af ham i dag, for han hjælper mange mennesker på det grundlag for at få det bedre. Og det er jo dejligt. Børnene synes jo, det er vældig godt, vores far han i den alder kan få det bedre. Der var stor forskel på min mand. Nu kunne han pludselig sætte en hel ting i sving. Nu skulle han det, og nu skulle han det, og han var næsten ikke til at styre. Og han blev ikke sådan træt. Fordi nu kunne han jo få luft. Det er jo lykke.
So Henning said, I started 20 years ago, and it was an amazing time for him. And now he gets to treat his own father and save his father's life with this technology. So guys, the environment has changed. We have to invest more and more to truly innovate. But as we fight against illness, as we fight against trauma, as we provide this wonderful technology to patients, I really think that the rewards of treating these patients, providing cost-effective, important therapies to them, is a privilege that we all have. And those of us who are dedicated to innovation go home every day and think, wow, we call this a job. It's a privilege. So thank you for coming this morning. Innovation is alive and well, and I hope to be on this journey with all of you. Thank you very much.
So we have a little bit of time for a Q&A. There's going to be some microphones going around the audience. If you have a question, please. Anyone? Back there?
So the one key piece that I'd like to know is when you went from the one person with the lonely booth and no one ever came by, what was that big breakthrough and how long did it take?
Great question.
Yeah, so we started developing the transcatheter valve. We founded the company in 1999. It wasn't that long to get to first in man, April 2002. So we started our development in January of 2000. So that's pretty darn fast to create a brand new heart valve. I think the challenge again was to get to the point where you're really comfortable with this product. We had to do what we talked about a few minutes ago, which is to go to Europe and get some clinical experience over time and iterate. And so we continued to improve this product, and the company was sold to Edwards in January 2004. By then, we'd only done 14 patients. Edwards, with their technology and a real commitment to this, we've accelerated that over the next several years dramatically, adding improved delivery systems, better tissue sources, and today something like 30,000 patients have received transcatheter heart valves since the first patient in 2002. So the curve is pretty steep once you get going, but it takes 10 years to make a real innovation.
We've got a question up at the front over here. Let's make the microwave or the microphone girl work really hard. Sorry about that.
Stanton, in the beginning, you mentioned the R&D commitment from public companies. And I'm curious to get your take on the role of venture capital in funding innovation compared to public companies and where you expect it to go in the future.
Yeah. I have tremendous respect for venture capital. I think that they fund a lot of the real fundamental innovation in the medical device area. And you see fluctuations over the last several years. They went through a really hard time, a lot of consolidation. I think money's starting to go back into venture capitalists. The ones who are successful, raising additional funds is not so difficult. There was probably a period of time where there was too much money chasing deals that were not as good as they should have been, and I think a lot of companies suffered for that. But I think, in fact, one thing I will say, though, is that the Series A financings are probably harder than ever, and that's the one thing I worry about, is that I always thought venture capitalists were always there to do the first rounds of funding, and some still do, but a lot of them, they want you to wring the risk out before you go see them, and that seems ironic to me that they want you to lower risk, because I thought that was their job, was risk-taking. So I think that is a challenge still today, is the Series A. I think a lot of angels have stepped up in founding companies and doing some of the early work. But again, the venture capitalists are being very selective. They understand this environment. They know that you have to generate real data, and data is costly and time-consuming, and that's tough for venture capital, right? So this cost effectiveness, this environment that we have makes it harder. That being said, boy, I see a lot of startups, and I see a lot of startups doing just fine. But I think it's the most compelling ones, and maybe that's the way it should be.
I thought I saw right over here.
Thank you. Two technologies that seem to be capturing headlines these days: three-dimensional printing and genetic engineering / tissue engineering. But we see your slides here that the concept of TAVI versus first in man was 20 years at the pure synthetic. So what do you think about these headlines that we'll be able to have in situ growth of heart valves, and that's what the future holds for us?
I applaud those visions. And again, this is where, if you think about venture capital being kind of in this early phase, and by the way, PVT was a venture capital funded company, of course. Prior to the venture capital, a lot of work's being done in universities. And I work with a lot of biomedical engineering schools around the country. And that's where a lot of this work, I think, really deserves to be done, which is in biomedical engineering schools. And I see a lot of work being done there. But I think when you move to a commercial stage, there's a lot of really tough issues, right? How do you take a genetically engineered tissue? I'm going to take your tissue and make your own heart valve. How's that sterile? Okay? How do I get it to you? How long does it last in air? How are the cells preserved? I mean, there's huge issues in going to this wonderful vision. I personally am more of a believer in implanting a matrix in your body's its own bioreactor, and I see people working in that area. But you know, I think having a vision for having a living, growing valve inside of you, having tissues that become incorporated into your own tissue, is certainly the future of medical devices, and I think it is the way it will go, but it will take 20 years, yes, it will. And a lot of research and a lot of development.
I just thought I saw some questions on this side of the room. How about right there?
You mentioned the disengagement of the VCs as one barrier or obstacle to innovation. What are the other obstacles or things that can be worked on to bring innovation back into the U.S., in your view?
Well, you know, it's even when the FDA talks about, they have an innovation initiative around first in man in the United States to try to bring them back. One of the obstacles I worry about is the IRBs. IRBs have not seen a first in man in how many years? You know, so you think about them having to judge the risk of, you're going to go from animal studies to first in man. And boy, I'm acutely aware of the translational research problems in going from animals to first in man. Those are risks. And so getting that risk-benefit right for the patients who are going to be part of these first-in-man trials is extraordinarily complicated, okay? And I think that FDA hasn't quite figured it out because we haven't started doing those first-in-man studies in the U.S. How do they judge this risk-benefit? Most of the time the FDA just sees the risk. They don't see the benefit, and that's our challenge. But I think the IRBs are going to have the same problem. Our partners, many of the research physicians around the United States, they desperately want to be back involved in innovation. Most of the innovation is happening here. And to do the clinical research here and to do the first-in-mans here makes sense. But I think the regulatory burdens are the biggest ones, and I think the hospitals are going to be a challenge for us as well.
We've got a question right here in the middle.
Hi. Actually, my question is around that same vein of the first-in-man clinical. You know, all the companies that I've worked for have struggled with that. Do you have any, I know you just mentioned the IRBs as a risk and the regulatory environment. Have you thought a bit about how the industry might help to prepare the IRBs and the regulatory authorities for what we really do need is to be able to do that first-in-man work here in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think that where I believe that you will have the most success in working with these hospitals where we plan to do first-in-man is where the lead research physician already has a great experience in doing clinical research there, already has a relationship with the IRB, and this is where facts are friendly. I mean, I would love to see in these instances kind of a partnership between an industry person and the physician goes in front of the IRB to answer their questions. Because the physician can never understand the technology the way we do as in industry, right? They just can't. We've spent years with it. You know, they're reading our documents and trying to translate them for the IRB. So I think that kind of partnership to go in and talk to the IRB will be really important. That assumes we get through the FDA, which I think remains a problem. I think they're seriously interested in doing this, but you know, they haven't. identified all the code yet, but I think they're really trying.
We have time for one more question. In the back. Right behind you.
Hi, I wanted to ask and get your thoughts on how to best leverage university innovation and research, and how to get those out into the market.
Great question.
Wow. The first gauntlet is the tech transfer office, right? So even if you identify something very good, some of the tech transfer offices are really sophisticated and some are not. And I find huge variability in that. So kind of negotiating with them, finding the right person in tech transfer that really gets it, because these guys, I don't know if you've ever talked with them. I feel for them. Many times they're sitting in a university environment. They may have a master's in chemical engineering, really bright people, but they're trying to take out of the university everything from IT to nuclear medicine products, and they can't possibly understand what they're trying to sell out of the university. They can't. And so the first thing you have to do, I think, is to involve the research clinician or clinicians, to have them work with the tech transfer office so that together, they can kind of explain, here's what it is, and then you have to represent the market realistically, right? To say, here's all the work we have to invest in, here's where it is, here's where the proof of feasibility is, creating those milestones, and hopefully, I think a lot of tech transfer offices now are actually licensing technology out for equity, and that's a really great way to do it. If they can participate through equity, that's a tremendous step forward. But it's variable. I wish I could tell you all the secrets, but I don't know them. I struggle every time to work with them and try to get these technologies out. But it can be done. I think you just have to be persistent. And sometimes it's pretty slow, too. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you today, and I hope you guys have a great week here at MDDI.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stan.
Hi, I'm Stan Rowe. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Edwards Life Sciences, and I also run advanced technology there, which is an innovation hub within a medium-sized cardiovascular company.
Great, thanks. We're really glad to have you here. So, Stan, how do you think the industry is going to perform in the near future, near to medium future, maybe the next 5 years or so?
I think that the industry's under a lot of price pressure. There's a lot of pressure from regulatory bodies. CMS has a lot of initiatives for cost control, comparative effectiveness. So I think it's a tough environment, and a lot of the requirements have increased. So I think that a lot of new products are going to have to go through a lot more expensive process. But that being said, if you look at the health of the industry over the last couple of years, where the same environment has really existed, we're doing okay. I think profits are looking okay. I think people are being more efficient with their investments in R&D, and they're improving the efficiency of manufacturing. They're looking to leverage their technology in international markets, and that's all paying off.
So what's one piece of advice you would give to a startup in this industry?
To a startup? Well, I'm not sure I have just one. But I think there are several key lessons. One is perseverance, right? You never get it right the first time, and that is that you have to be very adaptive. You have to go out and learn. You learn from your early benchtop tests. You learn from your fatigue testing. You learn from your validations and verifications. You learn in your first clinical studies, and so really being quick to learn and adapt and being really close to your technology so that you can advance it is really critical. And then the second key thing is, you got to have funding to keep the doors open and to advance. And so having great relationships with industry and venture capital or angel networks to advance your technology is going to be critical.
What do you see as the most significant threat to the medical device industry, and why?
Well, I think the biggest threat to us right now, I think, is if there's a large increase in the regulatory requirements in Europe. And I've seen some discussions of that to have more of a PMA type process. And I think Europe has been a place where we've been able to go and do our early clinicals. The CE mark's been achievable in a reasonable manner. We don't have huge burdens of efficacy, but we have to prove safety. The big burden there has always been getting reimbursement, right? You have to go country by country to get reimbursement. But now if the regulatory hurdle gets raised, then I think one of the key places for us to innovate will change. And I think that would be a tough place for us. And obviously Europe is at least the second largest market in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, where do you predict innovation will go to next if Europe does raise the bar on its regulatory process?
I think it'll very likely it would go to South America, okay, or certain areas of Asia where there are some really good clinicians. I mean, you think great clinicians in New Zealand and Australia, mm-hmm, a lot of great physicians in Brazil and Argentina. Those are good places where studies could be done.
Right, okay. Yeah, Australia has a fairly relaxed regulatory process. It's very similar to the CE mark, if I'm correct.
Well, it's reasonable, yes.
Okay. So what advice would you give an engineer starting in this industry?
I think the most valuable engineers that I run into are those who have a fairly broad range of experience.
Okay.
So the engineers who spend time in manufacturing, maybe in quality, they do R&D, they get a broad range of exposure, maybe even marketing or clinical engineering, makes them more valuable, because the idea that we can kind of define a product that engineers can just build, we say, look, here's the perfect product, go build it, mm-hmm, that doesn't really work.
Yeah.
What you need are engineers who understand better what clinicians really want, right? So that if we can say, if they can get closer to understanding the market, they can understand the physician requirements while understanding the quality, regulatory, manufacturing requirements, they're in a much better position to really innovate. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage them to get a broad range of experience.
What about other industries? Do you think they should go work in other industries first or in addition to?
I don't think that's necessary. Okay. I think if you have a good background in mechanical engineering or biomedical engineering, most companies and even startup environments give you huge exposure to everything that we have to do. And so you can definitely learn on the job very successfully.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time.
No, my pleasure.
It was great to meet you too.
Nice to meet you too, Helen.
Yeah.